The Mix Minus podcast is brought to you by Big League Pillows. Customizable sports jersey pillows. You can add your name on the back, on the front, and your number to a large assortment of sport jersey styles and colors. Go to bigleaguepillows.com and use promotional code MIXMINUS, that's this podcast, to get free shipping on your order. That's pretty good, because you know how much shipping can be. And if I can extend free shipping to you, you can get your Big League pillow without that added cost. We will eat that because we want you to have your Big League pillow. Folks, how you doing? I am back here again. It is July 14th, 2018. I have not done a podcast in a long time. I'm just looking now to see how long it's been. It's very possible it's been 3 weeks, which is crazy when you think about it. This is why it's so important to stay on top of things, to stay on top of doing things with regularity, week after week, day after day if you have to. Whatever that interval you need for the thing you want to do or need to do is, you need to do it. Now then again, there's people on the flip side who will say, it's good to have a break too. It's good to decompress. It's good to step away for a moment so you can come back that much more rejuvenated. So yeah, I'm looking here. June 23rd was the last episode that was released. So if there's 30 days in June, that would have been 7, and now we're at 14. It's been 21 days since I released one. It has been quiet. I've been on vacation. Yesterday was my birthday. I turned 36 years old. God, I still feel like I'm 16. Internally. I mean, I'm a mature 16-year-old, but you never really, when you see through your own eyes, you never really feel like you're growing older. And then when you see yourself in the mirror day after day, or 100 times a day as I do, just kidding, you never see yourself getting older. And even when you see younger pictures of yourself, unless it was when you were an early teenager, or I guess through your teenage years, but there reaches a certain point where you don't look that different to yourself. Probably around college was that point for me, even though I always look very young, but that's okay. I always say once I got married to Melanie, I never got carded again. So that was another positive of shacking up with somebody and getting married. But it's funny. It's been 21 days. I really wanted to do a podcast last week. I got down here to the podcast studio, sat down and tried to do one. And then Liam started kicking up upstairs. We just moved him into a bed. So I have my Nest camera app on my iPhone showing right now, so I can see if he does anything, if he tries to get up. Because now that he's in a bed, it's free game for whatever's going to happen. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. He gets out of there and he runs out and it's over. When he was in a crib, he was contained, right? So he could start talking, he could start rolling around, but he wasn't going to get out and run away. So when I'm doing the podcast, it's a little difficult. And last week he got out in time, to the point where I couldn't actually do one. And I was just not feeling that great. It's been 3 weeks again, but you ever get that where you just, a certain level of sort of unseen melancholy just comes upon you? And it's the reason why, you always have to be on guard. You can be the happiest person in the world, at least in your own mind. You can have all the tools possible to deflect anxiety, to deflect stress, to deflect sadness. And when you're living well, you're doing the things you want to do, you hopefully don't experience that a lot in your day-to-day. Though there are things that come from the outside in that can kind of force those different feelings on you, which can cause melancholy. But sometimes to me, melancholy is almost, it's a slow, I guess you could use the word insidious, but it's a slow build towards something. And then you just reach a point where you're like, I don't feel good right now. And I think sometimes it's good to get that because it can spur you to do stuff, to maybe try to push forward and jump into a new line of work, a new challenge. You can almost be disgusted with yourself for feeling melancholy, and you want to almost go looking around for why you have it. And that really is the case for me because I was a psychology major in college, and I learned so much about psychology and about the brain. And I almost feel like I have a ninja-like ability to deflect almost anything. I think many men have this, and I think women often do not have as good a toolbox of deflection, which is good because you need both. If a bear's running at you, you got to have anxiety. Although if a bear's running at me, forget the deflection tools I have. I'm going to be scared too. But you know what I mean? If there are things that cause anxiety to one person, it often does not cause anxiety to me, especially existential thoughts, especially things where you're thinking about yourself not being up to the challenge of something or not being worthy of something. I do have a good level of confidence in myself where I always feel like I can walk into any room and I have as much knowledge, I have as much ability to navigate that room as anybody. I mean, I never feel inferior, if that makes sense. And I think at a certain point when you're younger, you do have those inferiority, not complexes, but you do have those feelings. There's either the bullied or the bullies, and then many people will say the bully has the most feelings of inferiority of anybody, and that they're kind of being the aggressors to hide that. I think I had points where I was bullied, but then I reached a point where I felt very secure with my abilities and my skills, and that has really gone on in my life. I just turned 36 years old. As I said, I cannot believe I'm halfway to 72 years old. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's weird when you think of it that I've lived half of 72 years. Absurd. But there's something about this year. Melancholy came in. I don't think I've done a podcast. Well, I did after the finals when that ended. But there reaches a point in the sports season where there's not a lot of things to look forward to. I have to a degree gotten into the World Cup, and I've watched that as much as I can. But it's not like I'm living and dying with it. The Mets have just been absolutely horrendous. They've fallen off so much. They're like 37 and 54 or something like that. They're at the bottom of the NL East, last I heard. I was listening to Mike Francesa's Open from yesterday, but I was listening to it today, so I don't know if that standing has changed. But the Mets were at the bottom. And the Mets thought they were going to make the playoffs. I thought the Mets were going to make the playoffs. I had them on the over of like 81 or 82 wins. And they sure started well, 11-1, something like that. And it's just fallen off so badly where there's just no impetus to watch it anymore. I have started watching more of the Yankees just to have something to be on in the background. That's the hard part with summertime. There's not as much of a chance to just have something compelling on in the background. You're either actively watching something, like a real television show that needs all of your attention, which I have been doing as well. But with sports, the best part of summer coming to an end, I love how I'm already looking for summer's demise, but the best part of it coming to an end is night after night at that point, you're having compelling background media on. You're having baseball, the stretch run to the playoffs, and then the playoff itself, the one-game playoff, and then the very compelling playoffs, because baseball turns into a whole nother ball of wax when the playoff starts. You are into every pitch, every game, and the anxiety and the drama ratchets up to a level that's no different than the regular season, but there's so much on the postseason that now it matters. Whereas one game out of any other game doesn't really matter in the regular season, which is actually what makes the Mets losing like this that much worse, because it doesn't matter as much, but they're that bad that you don't even want to watch it. That's how bad it is. But you get to that point when summer gets to its end of August, early September. Now you got football on several nights a week, and then obviously on Sundays as well. You have college football coming back. You eventually have the early NBA season coming, which is now in kind of late mid October. The season has begun. And then you get into training camps, I believe now starting some point in September. So that's something to look forward to. You always have something that's a background media that's compelling. When your baseball team's out of it, there's not a lot of compelling things as background media. So it's either watching shows you want to watch, and sometimes you're kind of shot at the end of a day, so you don't want to sit down and watch something that's going to need a lot of attention, no matter how much you like it. It can kind of sap some of that bandwidth from you that you don't really have. But I don't even know if it's all that. I've just been a little melancholy. Is it being 36? Is it kind of coming to grips with this thought that opportunities are not limitless, that your potential is maybe where it is now, And that's a good potential. But I think to the human brain, it constantly wants to know that there's more opportunity on the horizon, that there's something bigger, that there's a job on the horizon that everybody else is jealous of, that there's a challenge out there that's going to push you to new levels. And you have that when you're in your 20s coming out of college. You have that in your teenage years. You're sort of growing into the world. You're growing into your individuality. And there's always something. For me, my teens was about learning the guitar and mastering the guitar. My 20s was about working out and then mastering NBA basketball. Then I got into mastering podcasts. And then I got into this point where, where I'm nearly 5 years into the podcast, and that is starting to get a little commonplace in every day, which I never wanted to happen. Because that is where the challenge of the things you love kick in. When they become normal, when they become commonplace, that's when you need to keep doing them. Because like a relationship, like something new that comes into your life, it's never as special as the onset of that thing. When everything seems limitless, when the potential is the sky. When you reach a point, and that could be 5 years in, that could be with a relationship 5 years in, it could be 2 years in. When you reach the point where the potential is there, and you might have some more success, it's possible, but you've basically reached your cruising altitude. That has to be good enough for you to decide to continue with it. I think that's the case with marriage. I think you meet people and you do reach a point where you go, okay, this is how high we're going to fly. This isn't enough for me till death do us part. With Melanie, I reached the level and I went, wow, I can grow with this person. And so you make that decision. Sometimes it's a split-second decision. Sometimes it's the first moment you meet them, which kind of flies in the face of what I'm saying. But you sort of reach a point where it's every day. The excitement, even from the people who follow you, has fallen off. I think early on when you try something new, a lot of voices come out of the woodworks to say, hey, that's a great job. Hey, I heard that. That's really cool. 100, 200 episodes, 100, 200 columns, whatever the thing you put out into the world is, at some point, people stop being cheerleaders. It doesn't mean that they don't continue to listen and imbibe it and digest it and consume it, but it means that it's actually become a part of their life. They see it show up in their feed and they listen to it. And I will often get a comment from folks, hey, I heard that, great job, or that was a really good point about this. But they're not sitting there day after day, 260 some odd episodes into it, 270 this will be, telling you every time, hey, great job, keep doing what you do. Because that's life. Life is reaching the point of it almost becoming a conveyor belt of doing the thing you do and continuing to do it and continuing to put it out there. But when you reach that point, it's got to be all about the intrinsic value of what you want out of it. And I have a studio down here. I honestly will sometimes say to myself, I got to do a podcast every day. I got to go down there and put in at least 10 or 15 minutes. And that could either get released daily, or then I've had this idea, get down there, do 10 or 15 minutes on a subject, and then at the end of the week, stitch together the best parts of, 5 or 6 days of 15 minutes, which would be an hour and a half of content or so. That you could stitch that maybe into an hour. You can find a way. It's all the same equipment, so the sound's going to be pretty similar day after the day. People aren't going to realize that there's a difference in that content, that it feels like it was one continuous episode. I've thought about that because you got to be doing more. You got to be putting in your hours, and you can't get jaded about the things you love to do. It's very easy to happen because you think if I just go away, nobody's going to be that upset about it. And you shouldn't do things for other people that way. But yet when we do things, we almost demand their acceptance. We demand everybody else's acceptance for the things we love doing intrinsically. And we'll say, oh, I don't care about doing it for other people. And in the early parts, you do that because you're so excited about new equipment and the new work process and the new kind of setup you have and learning the new world and then publishing it to all these different places and then seeing how many downloads you get on a regular basis. If you had told me when this started that I would be getting 500 to 700 downloads per episode on the regular, I would go, you're crazy. Well, first of all, when you start, you read up on podcasts. And then I remember one time I was reading an article about Chris Hardwick. I think USA Today did an interview with him. And he said, boy, it's pretty easy to just get to 10,000 downloads an episode. So I started going, oh boy, I'm starting at a time where there are a lot of people, but there's not quite a lot of people. Now everybody has one. It's like blogs 10 years ago. But I remember hearing that and saying, oh my God, 10,000 downloads. That's insane. Now, the crazy part is you need to get to 5,000 before you can even start winking at advertisers, at high-level advertisers who will come to you from outside. I have Big League Pillows here because I'm involved with Big League Pillows, and I think it's a cool thing, and it's a nice way to get some cross-pollination of things I'm working on into my podcast. So people hear it enough, and maybe you get a couple purchases off of it. But I heard that, and I said, 10,000. Oh, yeah, I want to get to 10,000. Now, you start out. When you get your first 100, you go, oh my God, 100 people listen to that? But then there's sort of a drop-off as people get acclimated to your podcast. Not that they don't want to listen to it, but it becomes just part of the background. So the true the true adopters of your podcast will continue to listen episode after episode. There's actually one gentleman, I won't say his name, and I think about him all the time because it was somebody I never would have thought would come into contact with my podcast. And I heard they did. I heard through back channels that they did. And apparently this podcast has gotten that person through two major health, I guess you'd call them emergencies. And that person, I've been told, listens to this podcast, the archives, 270 episodes. There's a lot of content here. Listens to my podcast every day and listens to podcast after podcast every night going to sleep. And that to me is cool. That was something that I heard early on doing this. I would hear the different people around the world listening. I would hear that my friends who were getting married were driving up from Texas to New Jersey and they were listening to my podcast in the car. I hear about this gentleman. I hear about this coach at this school in the middle of the country. And you hear like these stories which give you a sort of novelty to it. It gives you an impetus to go, that people are listening to this, to my thoughts when I'm just talking. And that's cool. And that's great. And you got to retain that, and you have to really go forward with that being an operating principle, that you can't stop. Because if you do stop, it just goes away. And why stop doing something that is coming down, turning on a mic, and speaking? Something that organizes my week. I read something great on a Monday morning, I put it into a notepad. I watch something great on a Tuesday night, I put it into a notepad. And by the end of that week, I try to tie all these things together and almost in a diary fashion, put out to the world a synthesis of what happened that week. And I often love coming across episodes from 2, 3, 4 years ago where I don't even know who that person is talking. What was going through that person's mind at that time to come up with that point? And here I am years later. I'd love to be doing this where 10 years later I have a backlog of all this stuff I've created. And look, I've become an expert along the way of podcasting. Maybe not doing it and getting a mass audience of 1 million people. Very few people get that. I think the median amount of downloads across all podcasts, if you remove the really low yielding download podcasts and the really high ones like Joe Rogan, Mark Maron, it's something like 147 downloads per episode. So I'm 5 times that at this point, and I'm growing, and I'm constantly growing. And if that many people listen to my podcast on a regular basis, that's pretty freaking cool. And I'm learning a skill. I'm learning many ancillary skills in this cottage industry that is podcasting, which aligns with many other skills you need to have today in the social media space, in the editing space, in the creating space. Content is king, as they say. Everybody's buying content. So throw yourself out there. I've often thought, do I write a book? Not because people are going to die to write a, not to read, or not because people are dying to get that, but to write a book, to go through that process, to release it on Amazon. Greg Harinya, who's on this podcast, wrote a book, several years ago. And it's a great book. And it's amazing that someone wrote a book and released it, and it's edited well, and it's written, it's cogent, it's coherent. They created a book. It's out there. No matter how many people bought it, you have a book with a real cover, some kind of publisher, and something that's real. I read his real book. Maybe I want to create a book. Maybe you want to create a book out of interviews that you've had, some of the top interviews. I was thinking For every 100 episodes, maybe you pick the top 25 interviews. Maybe you tell the story of your life as told through your podcast. I mean, we've seen Timothy Ferriss do it. I saw Mark Maron do it. You create some kind of good as a complement to what you're already creating. You put what is audio into text, and now it's a new thing, something people can read. It's something they synthesize differently than listening to. But I feel inspired now because I've had a melancholy. I really have. It's come on, and I don't know what to do next. I have a very stable job. I have a good job. Do I probably need to make twice as much as I'm making? Maybe. Do I have the ability to do that? I think so. And then what happens is you start getting that challenge internally. I am not an aggressive person, but I am a fairness person. And when I see what I'm able to do, and then I'll often just look around at jobs. I'll just put in keywords. Google's got a really good aggregator for jobs. So I might put a keyword like digital jobs because you never know what kind of weird jobs come up, or podcast jobs or things like that. And I say to myself, I see what's out there and I see the skills needed and the years that you've needed to put in on this. And I reach levels where I'm like, oh my gosh, I really should be making a lot more. But is it about money? At a certain level it is, because I moved into this home able to afford it with my wife on our dual income. But I moved in thinking I'm going to move up eventually to where we grow into this house, both with a family, hopefully with several kids at some point, and then with an income that both supports that growing family and makes the house payments less. And that you start to find ways to put money away, to put money towards cool vacations, to be able to do things at the spur of a moment without having to think too far ahead about it. That's what money provides you. A comfort level with money provides you the ability to do the things you wanted to do. They say it's not about money, it's about experiences. That you should use your money to buy experiences because you never forget those. When you go up to Saratoga for a weekend, the things you experience, the restaurants you go to, the routine that you force on yourselves, which is important, the memories you make, you don't forget them. And then in the middle of winter, you think to yourself, boy, that was a great weekend at Saratoga. And then you think, hey, we could go in the winter. Hey, we can go again next year. And then you start going back to the places you went to, about the coffee shop you found, about the lunch place where you got your really good sandwiches. And those are the things you remember. The books you read when you were there, the content you watched, the way your son grew up going in the pool, moving from a crib to a bed. All these things you buy experiences. And it starts getting into my mind, boy, I could jump into that. And then I'm thinking, do I want to jump into that? Or do I want to jump into something that is a burgeoning interest that I'm not experienced at in the business world like I am, say, for project management? I'm now project management certified. I did an episode about that. I don't know if I want to be in project management, but that's where my experience is. That's where my certifications are. That's the place where I would jump to get those money levels that maybe make you a little more comfortable. But do I want to do that? I'm constantly, cautiously kind of not pushing myself ahead because you're not all bought in. It's funny to not be bought in on something that gets you money. I'm just not. And then I come back to, is it me? Is it deflection? Is it me not wanting to go in there and not be good enough, not get the job? Is it me not wanting to go in and then the person offers you the job and you have to go through the difficult thing of uprooting something you've been at for 10 years? But then you could say to yourself, the thing I've been at for 10 years should have maybe yielded me a level that gets closer to those monetary levels you're seeing in the job you're at now in other places. Then you think, I have to go to New York. How's that going to change my day? That's where you go to get really those higher levels of money in this industry. How am I going to do that? Am I going to be willing to get up at 5 to get myself into New York at a certain time? Because the rules are different there. And then you find people in the world who tell you the stories of them having those kind of jobs, them living out here, and they have the flexibility that you want. They're home 2 days a week. They have kids. They have nannies. They're living the life they want to, that you want to. And so you say to yourself, well, could I do that now? Do I have to wait 5-10 years at the new place to get to that flexibility? You don't know. But you outthink yourself out of things. You got to stop outthinking. That's the hardest part, I think, of growing up, is your damn brain. You add all of this intelligence and knowledge to it, and that intelligence and knowledge backfires on you. It's the bird on your shoulder telling you don't do it or think about doing it. Do you ever look at a position, look at a new opportunity and then almost sit on it for a day, imagining that you got it and thinking about your day and your life through that next day? I often do that. And then by the end of the day, I go, I didn't really like that. But it's difficult. It's hard. It's hard to jump to new things, especially when you have a family, when you have a home, when you have a mortgage, when you have a wife, when you have all these responsibilities that are going to fundamentally change if you accept the new thing. And change is necessary because change might get you out of the melancholy. Now, I think I'll get out of the melancholy anyway. But should I have used that melancholy to change up my life while I was in it? Or do I just say to myself, the melancholy will dissipate and then I'll be back and okay? Would I have been better off? Like Rahm Emanuel said, never let a recession go to waste. And that's how they passed a lot of the things in the early Obama era. They had that recession and it was a disaster. And they kind of used it as a catalyst for growth, as an impetus to enact legislation, policies that you could never get into fair weather. When you're happy, you're not necessarily going to jump. Although maybe that's the time you should. When you're down, that's when you jump. Not a very good illusion, by the way. I mean, that's when you jump to a new thing, when you're down, because you don't want to be down and you don't want to look at yourself as being down. You just want to go to something. And then I think my let's say what my dream job is, and I don't even know what that is anymore. Because every single nook of the industries that I'm associated with, to a certain degree, demand specialty, and I'm a jack of all trades. And so I look at the each job and I say, well, my diversified portfolio of skills might make me better at that job because I can bring more things to bear in it than the specialist who only knows certain parameters, a certain way they can navigate the job. I might bring more, but it's hard in an interview to get that job with that argument. Or is it? I don't know. Then there's many who say you just got to take interviews because you have to be practiced at that. You have to be good at interviewing. And if you don't take interviews, you almost take interviews just to kick the tires, to get your fastball up to speed, to hear what is being asked of the applicant, to then angle your pitch, your personal pitch, towards those things. The keywords, the buzzwords, the industry slang. I don't know. I also went on vacation in the first week of July. Pretty much July 1st to maybe July 8th or something. We were there up on my family's summer home in Thousand Islands. And this is a vacation I always love doing. We didn't get to get over to the island last year because there were just waters that were rising up so high that you couldn't even get your boat out there. All the docks were destroyed from the waters rising up so high. I was also thinking, boy, let's move up there and let's start a dock building company. Let's see if we can be the ambitious dock builders who get the goods, who get the workers, and just get out there and with New York City efficiency, build those docks and just make a killing. Bubba Gump shrimp after the storm. And maybe that's a good idea. There's probably other people doing it, but hey, it might be a good idea. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm that ambitious in that regard, I don't know. But we went up there, and I always loved this place because there's this house on an island, Carlton Island, the only land that switched from the British to the Americans after the War of 1812, and it wasn't in some kind of war footing. As the story goes, a handful of drunk soldiers from the American side in Millen's Bay, from what I recall, came on over to this island, which is about a 15-minute power boat ride. I don't know how they went over, maybe with, canoes and rows or rowboats or whatever. They went over there and took the island by force. There was apparently only old people living there at the time and women and children, and they didn't cause any ruckus. They didn't hurt anyone. Apparently all these people went willingly. It's this island that's about 5 miles around if you walk it or if you drive an ATV. But the cool thing to me with this island is it was where they built the ships for the war. So there's one cove on the north end of the island where if you really look hard enough, you can find pieces of old shipwrecks. My cousin was up there one time and found a coin of the realm of Britain from like the 1700s, which is so cool. But this island used to have a downtown. It used to have shops and businesses and bars and foods and schools. And now it's just an uninhabitable, well, not uninhabitable. It's not an island people live on where commerce happens. There are probably 20 houses around the perimeter of the island where people live, and they mostly live facing the water. And then there's just this vast expanse of sort of nature in the middle of the island. There's blue herons. There's apparently koi dogs, where coyotes mated with dogs. I don't know. And apparently when it's really cold and the ice happens, and it's thick ice because it gets cold up there, it'll get negative 30 on that lake, animals will come over on the ice, and now they're on the island when the ice recedes. There's koi dogs, there's deer, there's just all kinds of habitat on this island. It's a great time. But when I would go up there, my day would go as follows before I had a child, before I had a wife. Although when my wife came on the scene, she would come up there and follow the routine of it. But I'd get up at 5. I'd get up before everybody. And the walls and the floors are as thin as paper, so you can hear everyone moving around. When somebody starts the Keurig, as I would have to do when I'd get up at 5, it would shake the house. You know how loud those older Keurigs can be. I would go down there, I'd get a couple of Keurigs, and I would just read out on the deck as the sun was coming up. I would read my backlog of articles, of the daily newspaper, of books. I would just read and read and read, and then people would start getting up around 7. I'd continue to read because you had nobody begging for your time. There was nobody there who was going to need to be watched like a toddler. And my wife would fall into many of the same routines. Then I'd eat a couple waffles. My mom would make those nice Belgian waffles. We have the waffle maker. You'd eat as many as your heart content because you're going to walk. We'd finish up those waffles, and then right after that, we'd begin the 5-mile walk. It takes about an hour and 40 minutes to round this island. It's beautiful. There's nothing as good to the body as feeling as walking. And there's all kinds of trails that circumnavigate this island. And you have all these views. You view Canada. You then view the New York side, because this thing is smack dab in the middle of the two countries. And you just go around and you're talking. You're talking with whoever's on the trip with you. It's always my wife. We get a lot of talking done because there's so much talking that can happen when you're not looking eye to eye with somebody. When you're it's the same reason why cars work a lot for talking, because you're parallel to each other. You're arm in arm in a way, but you're looking ahead and you're just speaking. And you're not looking for the cues that they're providing as they speak. And you're just moving ahead, and everybody's feeling good. They get a little of those endorphins rolling, and you just walk and you walk and you walk, and it peels off a good hour and 45 minutes of the day. It wears you down enough, but it doesn't wear you down like sprinting or running. You get a nice sort of exercise buzz. You get some sweat going. And then what happens? You get back around noontime, 1. Maybe you jump in the freezing cold river to cool yourself off, take a shower. There's sulfur water, unfortunately. That's how the water is, that's how it's made. No, it's not drinkable, really. I guess you could drink it, but it's got that thing where the sulfur is sort of used as a cleaning agent, but it smells like rotten egg sulfur. So it's like you're taking a shower of rotten eggs, and it's not even got a very good the shower pressure is not amazing. So it sort of feels like a half showered. But if you take the shower late enough the day, it holds over till the next day enough. You eat some lunch, then you go back to reading. And when you go to this island, what you bring over is what you eat. So it's fun. It's sort of like downloading stuff to watch later. Like there's an excitement to the process of downloading it. So you download a bunch of things because you're not going to have internet on the island. You can get cellular internet, but you don't get internet enough to be able to stream media, to be constantly connected to the internet. And I like that aspect. And there's no television either. There's a DVD player. There is a phone, but there's no internet or television for the most part. So what you do is you download stuff. This year I downloaded the entire Billion Season 2. Funny enough, my wife and I we got past only episode 1 because it's just not as much time as you think, especially with a toddler. And then on the second iPad, I downloaded a lot of Daniel Tiger, which you can download through the Prime app, Amazon Prime app. That is a great part of Prime, is being able to download shows. Same thing with Netflix. You can download shows for later watching, but you download. Those got a lot more watched. There was a lot of watching there because watching 2 to 3 Daniel Tiger episodes in a day is what gets my son through a lot of it. It's a perfect pacifier at times, and it's just a way to set and settle the day. but you download. You also go back on land and you get all the food you want. You get all your food for breakfast, for lunch, and then what you're going to cook that night. And it's not going to be elaborate. It's sort of camp cooking in a way. So you throw things in the slow cooker, you put things on the grill, you get some sides, you have rice. It's nice. And you get a lot of alcohol. You get wine. Often we'll start with a bottle and then end up with a box. You get your beers. It's sort of, it's a Rorschach test. You throw everything you want to onto this island, everything you dream and hope for, alcohol, food, content, and you just hope that you're going to be able to consume it all. The food and the alcohol you tend to consume, the coffee you consume, content not so much anymore. But that's what I used to do. I would take a nap in the afternoon after the lunch while I was trying to read, which would knock me out. And because I got up at 5 and because I did a 2-hour walk, I would then just pass out. And you wake up around 4:30, and then all of a sudden, the dinner process is going to begin at 5. You can start your happy hour. You drink enough to where you're completely pacified, and dinner is nice. Sunset coming down on the island. There's nowhere you're going. Everything is by boat, and you just stay there as the sun comes down. Maybe you go in, watch a little something more, and you're asleep by like 9:30 because you got up at 5, and you start back over the next day. It's a little different now with a 3.5-year-old. As I said, we couldn't go to the island last year because the waters rose up so high. And it would have been halfway okay last year because he was still in a crib and we can control that a little more. But we decided, for expedience sake, my wife and I decided, hey, it's time for maybe him to get into a bed. And we can't do it in the school year because there's just not the time. No one's with him all day. And we wanted it to be either me or my wife, or both, preferably, who would be with him as we were trying to make the transition to the bed from the crib. It's a lot to ask of those watching your son at home. So we only had 1 week before we were going away, and we began the process. We put him into the room on the other side of the house. We got those little bumpers that you can get on Amazon that you kind of stick under the covers. They're not bumpers you screw in or install. They're sort of just these little, they're almost half pregnancy pillows in a way, and they lump in on either side of the bed. And they were pretty good. And I'll tell you what, he ended up doing really well, his transition to sleeping in a bed. It's gone very well. It was hard for the parents, us, because it's such a transition and so different. And he's free now. I mean, we got gates and stuff for the second floor, which we put back into effect. But he's so much bigger now that he will just get up and go. And then he'll come looking for us. And initially, he was coming to us at 5 a.m. He would get up 2 times a night. And I'd have to go get him because my wife's a little under the weather lately. And it was tough. So it would interrupt sleep. And then you're constantly worried about, is this working? How's it going? It's sort of like the first time the baby leaves your room and you put them into a crib. You wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, is he or she alive? And that's a crazy thought to have because it's like nature's keeping these things going for the most part. So, but they're not in your view. They're not right in your sanctum, in your room there. And so there's a little bit of that now. He's in a bed, so you're watching the video as much as possible to see how he's doing with that. And he did pretty well. Now, we were having difficulties because he'd get up at 5, and it was hard. It was irregular. You couldn't plan your day as much. If I were still working out early in the morning, I'd be very frustrated because that part would be really interrupted. And getting that workout's important, especially when you're going through stressful. Look, it's not stress at the highest levels, but it's stressful when routines are upended in my household. And so I've been working out at work around lunchtime. Not the best time for me to work out. I don't love it. But I always know I'm going to get a workout in for the most part. I always know I'm going to get that hour in twice a week there. And then I work out on the weekends here. But we got him into that routine and it was basically working. And we wanted to get him into a bed because when we go up to Thousand Islands, we're going to be on a house they have on the land in a town called Cape Vincent, which they've had since I was born. So 36 years they've had this home. And it's not like we're some ostentatious family with all these homes. This was literally, my parents were dirt poor and they wanted to have a home up there. And they were able to get a veritable mansion, early 1800s mansion, for like $20,000. And they put out every penny they had to get it. And so now, who knows what it's worth now, but it's accumulated into being this house they've had for almost 40 years. So we've always gone there. Only in the last 10 or 12 years did this island home come into play. My mom came into some money and she used it to get this home. And it really changed the complexion of this vacation up there, having this home on an island. It made going up there, when you go somewhere when you're a kid, it doesn't feel special anymore. And you go up to a place which is a little slower, well, a lot slower than where you're from, which is cool when you're young because you're able to do so much more than you're able to do at home. There's so much more freedom because it's a safe place. I remember actually driving my parents' car there when I was 15 because there's no police. Who's stopping you? There's no cars on the road even. So I would do that. I remember being with these kids, and the kids up there were not the greatest influences, but I remember running with the kids there, and then we would swim out to this dock in the middle of the St. Lawrence River and jump off this electric tower from like, it felt like 50 feet high. It was probably only like 20 or something, or 15, but jumping off on bare feet after climbing this tower that you should not be climbing in wet bare feet, but doing that. So you got a lot of freedom that you never had. You got it earlier there, which was cool. But then once you get old enough where you have the freedom anywhere, there's not a lot of cool things to do up there. We're not big boat people, and that's a big part. Fishing, boating, swimming in the river. We were never that huge into that, truth be told. It's just a lot of my mom's family accumulated up there and lived up there, so it became sort of the family place you go, and we always had this house up there. So the island house made it a lot better. But because we have these different situations, on top of the fact we thought we would maybe go to Canada for a night or two, we weren't sure if we'd do the Vermont thing like we did. We did not want to be finding cribs all across the place, renting cribs here, going here, moving a crib on the river over to the island house. So we sort of selfishly needed him to sleep in a bed. And so we did that. And it ended up sort of working in hindsight. But we got up there. It was boiling hot. It's never hot up there. It was in the 90s. It is never hot up there. It just has never in my lifetime been hot up there. It's always seasonable. It's always nice. The sun is hot during the day, but you get to nighttime and the breezes carry you through. There's no reason to have air conditioning. So there's not really air conditioning. And so that added a lot of stress. Having him in a bed in this house, him getting up at 5, it got difficult. And I don't know. I don't know if that played into it, to the melancholy, where you're kind of seeing your expectations, the history of what you know you can do in a place, that you can't do it there. And I maybe just can't do it there for a couple of years until he grows up enough where he's a little more self-sustaining and self-sufficient. And I can kind of, you don't need to be the porter and the daycare, day camp director for a child, which you really have to do when they're this age. They have enough freedom to be able to go where they want and do what they want, but not enough to know what they want to do. So you always have to carry them through doing what they need to do, and they can also just get into trouble. So you do need to be on the ball watching them as much as possible. But we got over there and the heat was brutal, and my wife wasn't feeling good, and a lot of the things I would do on this trip were not possible. I mean, in the past were just not possible anymore. And so I think that played into it. And I just think I've reached a point where I have to make a next step. I don't know what it is, though. Growing up, I always, up to a certain point in my life, I always felt like there were 3 or 4 moves I could make, that I could do. And I don't know what those moves are anymore, because I don't know if I want to be in this industry. But if you say that, then what were you building up towards? You got good at something that you're then going to bail on before reaping the benefits and the experience rewards of that? I don't know. It's tough. But, we were up there on this island. It was a great way to disconnect. It really is. Without the internet, without TV, it just decompresses you to a point that by the end of it, you're in shock. The clarity you sort of have in your mind, not being so connected to things. We are so connected. I mean, I was looking at my app here for the Google Wi-Fi that I have. There's something like 20 things connected to the Google Wi-Fis in the house. And I'm sitting there going, 20 things? That's so many things when you think of all the different smart speakers and smart TVs and smart, boxes, the Apple TVs, the Rokus, 20 things. It's like, holy moly. That's maybe a little too much to be connected to. But it was funny. This heat was bad. It really was bad. The first day we got there, I hadn't had time to get a haircut by the time we got up there. And usually that's not a problem because, again, it's pretty cool up there. And it was not cool this time. And so I was on a mission to get a haircut somehow. So it was Sunday by the time where I needed to get a haircut. I thought there was a barber in the town there, Cape Vincent. There used to be one down by the water. And it shows you how long I haven't been there paying attention. I went there. It's now like a insurance company. Then my wife and I found one that seemed to be in someone's house. It's sort of going back to first principles here in a way. Like people have businesses right out of their houses. It's sort of like how funeral homes are, where it's like the funeral home and it's the people's homes. It seems like a lot of businesses are heading in that direction. I do have to say, this town of Cape Vincent, things are picking up. It's almost cool to go to now. There's a little brewery in town now, and it is a quiet town, which is cool. Some restaurants coming up. There's a coffee place that's almost like a Starbucks with places to sit and get good coffee and lattes and treats, high-level treats, like our gastro pub type treats. So it's happening. Things are happening there. The park's been redone. And so that's been a nice aspect. I could almost go up there now without having to have the island in play. Those little bars, you got family there to watch Liam. But it was tough finding a haircutter. And then the next day, I was like, you know what? We got to drive back to Watertown. I got to get a haircut. I'm dying on the vine here. I'm overheated. I'm underslept. I'm anxious, and I don't get that way. The heat kills me. That is my kryptonite, is heat. It really is. No matter how hard I don't think it's the case, it is. We went on our honeymoon, on our cruise through the Mediterranean in the summer. What was that, back, 7 years ago now? Holy moly, 7 years we went on that cruise. And I got heat poisoning or, heat exhaustion, where I was knocked out for 2 full days on a cruise ship, intermittently sweating, and then chills. It was awful. I was wrecked. I've never been so wrecked by the sun. And now, because I know that happened, I can feel it coming on, and it beats me down. And I've been often thinking lately, was that the melancholy? Was it being so beaten down by external elements, by the heat, by not sleeping because my son was getting up in the middle of the night and then ultimately getting up at 5 on days? Was it that? Was it the walk added to that and all the exercise you're doing and then the drinking? I was like, holy crap, you can create a melancholy, a depression in yourself by just exposing yourself to so many outside elements. It's kind of crazy. And I wonder if there's almost a therapy to that. Like I was saying, the jumping off point being from feeling like you're at the bottom of something and using that as a way to ultimately ascend further than your baseline. Like I wonder if you could almost, you don't want to play with melancholy and depression, but if you can almost force it on you so that you could come out of it stronger and more vital and maybe come out ahead. But I'm not like that with vacation. I want vacation to leave me in a place where I am completely and utterly relaxed, recouped, rejuvenated. And so I don't know about that. But I was like, I got to get a haircut. I can't go onto this island. My hair it's like I have a freaking raccoon on my head. And so I'm looking up stuff and I see that this mall in Watertown, which is like 28 minutes in the wrong direction, back towards, it's the major city up there, Watertown, where a major city is sort of like, it's got the restaurants, it's got the mall, it doesn't really have skyscrapers or large buildings, but it's a locus of activity. And there's actually some burgeoning scene happening there too with beer culture on this river called the Black River, gastropubs, breweries, all this kind of stuff. So it's happening. It's almost like those lower those lower Hudson Valley towns. A lot of the ethics and ideas from them seem to be making their way all the way up here 5 hours north or 4 hours north of there, 3.5, something like that. But we had to get there. I had to get a haircut. And so we drove to this town, to Watertown, and I saw there were 3 potential haircutters in the one mall. It's crazy. 3 places to get your haircut. And I see the one called Master Cuts, and I'm thinking that's my game. That's what I'm looking for. I am any place that's like something cuts, some weird noun cuts, or no, an adjective cuts, super cuts, great clips, master cuts. I'm like, that's it. I'll go there. You get a little bit of talk with the person, but you're never going to see him again. Move on, pay $16, whatever, and then just, have a haircut that will look good in 2 days. Doesn't quite look good that day. But like I've said in the past with the lawn, you cut it a little funny. Within 2 days, it's all going to be even and look fine. And so I walk into the mall, and it was supposed to open at 11, this place. It's now, or 10, and it's now 11:20. I see haircutters standing outside one of those locked, pulled down gates. And we're like, oh, is there there? And they're like, oh, the owner's running a little late. I'm like, this is North Country right here for you. This is it. This is the middle of the country. We have a business. We have customers waiting. And the manager's not there. They're running a little late. And that's what we're expecting. Oh boy. So I keep going. I go to the other end of the mall. I see there's a barber shop. I'm seeing a lot of, I'm not saying this is bad, but it's almost too masculine for me. it's like the full-on barbershop aspect in this mall in northern New York. I'm like, wait, did I just go into the Bronx? Did I just go into Queens? Am I in Morningside Heights? I don't know what's going on here. And I didn't even know how the barbershop works. Is it only in cash? Do they do the shaves? I don't know. It felt a little intimidating to me. So I turned back around and I said, I don't know. I told my wife, I don't know. She goes, oh, there's a haircutter here. There was an empty salon. Nobody's there. And my wife walks up and they're like, oh yeah, we could take you right now. And so I sit down. The expectations of it feel a little more expensive than I'm ready for. The woman goes ahead to cut my hair, to ask me 15 questions about my hair that I've never been asked before. To when it's done, she was a very nice woman. She had a toddler as well who's been sleeping in a bed since they were 1.5. So we kind of bonded over that. She asked me so many questions, nice conversations. She treated me like a king. It was fantastic, but there's no one else there. So I'm thinking, boy, I'm going to get hoodwinked here. This is going to be a $60 haircut. I know it. Master cut $17, and I never asked, and you feel like it's below you to ask how much a haircut is. And I'm seething already because I'm like, this is so expensive. I'm driving nuts. She finishes it. She goes, why don't we take you over here and I'll shampoo your hair? And I'm like, oh my God. So she's shampooing, she's conditioning, she's just the whole nine. Like it was insane. And I'm like, well, God damn it. That's another $15. It's going to be a $75 haircut. Oh my God, I got hoodwinked. This is insane. You know, they're overwhelming me with services to make more money because they don't have anybody here. And I'm driving myself crazy with a smile on my face as I'm talking to her about toddlers. We get back, she's doing the nice like thing with the brush and the rub downs, like the talcum powder things, all this stuff. Probably normal course for anybody who goes to get their hair done at real places. And the moment of truth happens, we're done. I walk up. I have one of the most beautiful haircuts I've ever had. This thing was a beautiful haircut from the minute it was cut. I didn't need to wait 2 days. I walk up to the front and I'm just waiting for it to ring up. And you know, it's funny when they do the thing. I don't know if you've seen this at certain restaurants even, or certain places where you pick it up at a register. Or no, you know where I really see this? At the dry cleaners. And what they're really doing is putting in codes, but the codes will be like $22.99, $33.99, $44. And I'm like, this is going to be $700. And then it's like $50. You're like, oh, well, that's a lot still, but $50 is a lot. And so I'm seeing her do a lot of things and a lot of maneuvering, and she's probably putting in codes, $21. I was like, okay. I worried that much. It was $21. I was like, $10 tip. Boom. So we ended up halfway where I was afraid to end up anyway. But it was great. I got my hair cut, and we ultimately got over to the island. My brother Tom was there with his second set of friends he had brought over to the island. So we're sort of the anxious parents of a toddler trying to get him to the nap while these people are trying to get out and get their stuff out. And it never felt right. And it was overly hot. And it was just, they're sort of hipster kids from Bard. And nobody is really moving that fast. And they're sunny. First of all, we're trying to dock at the dock. And it's all these like mid-20s hipsters sunbathing on the dock. And my dad is deathly afraid when he's boating and he's got a dock. And so he needs like all these hands trying to help him guide in to get the ropes out, you know, to tie them up. These kids are just like sunbathing as we're yelling to like get some help. My brother did help, but it's funny. Those millennials today, they are funny. But we got over there. Look, the end of the day, the trip was great. My son pretty much napped and slept each night, but it was like a lottery. You didn't know what you were going to get. It was a roulette. And so you didn't know if today he wasn't going to nap, and it was a difficulty, and he kept running out of bed, and he kept yelling, and it just wasn't happening. It's like a serial killer upstairs humming, and you know they're coming, and you hear them like hitting their little weapon on the ground. Like he bangs around, he jumps around, and it wasn't happening. It just wasn't. It wasn't happening in a way that we were hoping, because we really wanted to go for our walks and we could only do it during a nap. And the sun was really hard. It was tough. And the anxiety that was bred in you was created from external elements. And maybe you had too much coffee. You're just getting a little crazy. And my wife is usually the anxious one, and I'm usually the calm, cool, and collected one. But I was starting to be the crazy monster now. And so it was tough. And there was a lot of, we're going home tomorrows. There was a lot of, let's break the kid out from certain family members and let's get him home and he'll be safe here. You guys can stay. It was just a lot of stress. And it ultimately worked out, but in the moment it never worked out. You know that feeling where it's like every moment it doesn't feel right and you're waiting for something to blow up, and only in hindsight can you say it worked out when it worked out. So it wasn't really a relaxing thing at the end of the day. But you know what I did too? I unplugged from news. I wasn't going to read any news. I said, let's just read some sports books right now, because it's completely overwhelming what's going on with the country, with the administration. It's all crazy. Partisan or not. And look, am I more left of center? I guess so. I'm liberal, I guess. I guess I am. I mean, I don't think that's a terrible thing. I don't follow anybody's ideology. I just have certain inborn things, I think, that have come from a lot of reading of a lot of different things, of a lot of different experiences, maybe growing up. But I'm not some person who's like a fan of liberalism the way someone's a fan of the Yankees, where everything the Yankees do are good and everything the Red Sox do are bad. Like, I'm for common sense, and this has been difficult. No matter how you cut it, my psychology is wrecked by this presidency because it's counter to everything, almost everything I believe, and it spits in the face of everything I believe. It's not even that it's like the other side running the country and doing it quietly and doing it with the normal processes and protocols and pushing things through legislation with the right way, getting filibuster-proof majorities. It feels like nefarious things are being slammed through, rushed down your throat, as the Republicans used to say when they felt the liberals were doing it to them, the Democrats. And it just feels unseemly. And day after day, it feels like you can't just enjoy your life. I mean, he's always in your face. He's always in your face on weekends, on Fridays, day after day, night after night. He's always in your face. It's what he needs. It's a narcissism that is necessary for him, because he needs to create the cycle and continue the cycle where people are talking about him, and then he's reacting, and then he's doing something, and then people are talking about him. It's out of control. And so that was one of the good things about unplugging, was that you're not as exposed to constant news. And you also realize that at the end of a day, at the end of a week where you're not so plugged in, that maybe the football didn't move that much further than it was at the end of the week. It's almost like day after day, the Trump administration is on offense. And on Monday, he throws a 50-yard pass that's caught by the wide receiver. And then it's turned back. It's brought back because there was offensive pass interference, or because more to the point, because the receiver was taunting the defense, and so they took it back. And so they ended up either where they started or 5 yards behind. But they still had the experience. They still had the visual of throwing the 50-yard pass. They showed they could do it, that they could throw a deep ball and catch it. And so from the other side, from the fan of the defensive side, you're saying, oh my God, they have it in them to throw a 50-yard pass. They could take this to the house. But then you had the idea where they did the taunting, they did the offensive pass interference, so they're actually back from before where they started. But the fact they can throw the 50-yard pass is ruining your days. I like that one. So I just cut off. And, with the analogy of sports, I went all the sports, and I was just reading. I was reading the book, The Dream Team by Jack McCallum. I think it came out 6 years ago now. But I really like the book. It's great to go back over time with the Dream Team, with all those stories, with all those great players at that point in time. And then I actually, I kind of put it together now with watching. I finally watched the Celtics Lakers 30 for 30 3-part documentary on ESPN. So I had a bunch of those. I had the second and third part DVR'd on my YouTube TV. For some reason, the first one wasn't there, so I took out a trial on the ESPN Plus, which is now where you can get all the 30 for 30s. It's only $4.99 a month, but I did the trial, and in the 7-day trial, I was able to watch the first one, cancel, and then watch the other 2-3 on my YouTube TV. So it was really good to kind of get exposed back to that 80s basketball. And then while I'm reading before that, the culmination of that basketball with the 92 Dream Team. So it was really good. But I only got halfway through that book. In the past, I would have read 3 or 4 books that week. But what are you going to do? As I said, we got through 1 episode of Billions, and that is set up to be good, obviously. We got through 14 episodes of Daniel Tiger, although I've seen them all already. But yeah, it was at the end of the day, it was nice. But, it was funny. We were coming down through, well, first off, we went to Canada for a morning. We expected to stay a night or 2, but we went over in the morning. It was nice to be in Canada. It's cool just to pop into a different country for a minute. And it's slightly different, but yet similar enough. So it was it was nice. We went over to Kingston, New York, and we drove over the Thousand Islands Bridge, which is a beautiful vista. It goes up real high. It's going over Wellesley Island and these different Thousand Islands. We stopped in a town on the Canadian side called Gananoque, which had a Tim Hortons, which is sort of Canada's version of Dunkin' Donuts, but it's much higher up in how it's viewed in the country. It's sort of the country's gold standard for coffee and donuts and all that. It's many of the same things you get in Dunkin' Donuts. A little more on the food end, even though Dunkin' Donuts has brought up the food quite a bit over the years. And you can get Tim Hortons in America, but man, is it front and center in Canada. So you always got to go there, get a nice coffee, get some Timbits, which is their version of Munchkins. And we went over to this town called Kingston. It's sort of a Portlandish town of Canada, city. A little hipster, a little countercultural in a way. It was actually the capital of Canada for like 4 years in the 1800s, which is interesting. But it's got a riverfront action. It's got a ferry, which we missed because you can actually take that ferry over to one island and then that next island ferry right into Cape Vincent. So if it aligned, we would have done it. But if you're not aligned, you're better off driving all the way back over to the west and then back east. We actually drove back and we got into Cape Vincent as the ferry we had just missed was docking there. So that ended up working out. But yeah, it was nice going into Canada. It was so hot though. I really think I'm going to go into Kingston maybe next year, maybe later in the summer. If we go up back to Thousand Islands to the houses up there, maybe go to Kingston for a night. Maybe get our parents to come over, my parents to come over so they can watch them at night and just hit the town a little bit. Nice restaurants, nice outdoor seating. Good food, good drinks. It'd be cool to kind of hit that town up a little bit. Little Canadian bar hopping. That would be good. But yeah, when we're coming back down, we came through Binghamton. We always love, Melanie was able to find several years ago this really nice farm, which is in the boonies of Binghamton. You're driving towards it and you're like, there's no way this is the right way. And then it just sort of appears like an oasis in the desert. And it's got tremendous breakfast. We're always like right under the gun to get there by the 10:30 time you have to get there for breakfast. We got there like 10:23 this time. Always under the gun, no matter how you do it, because it's like 2.5 hours to get there from leaving in the morning. And so we did get there, and it was good. It was funny when my wife was driving. She drove the whole way up there, and then we split the time driving home. But we were driving up there, I was thinking to myself, oh man, Binghamton, Tim Tebow. Former Heisman Trophy quarterback Tim Tebow of the Florida Gators gave it a go with several teams in the NFL, had a nice run with Denver one season, leading them down the stretch and getting them to the playoffs and actually beating, I forget who they beat, but was it the Steelers? Beating the Steelers in a first round and then ultimately succumbing to the Patriots, as many teams do in Foxborough a week later. Had a run, came to the Jets, went to the Eagles a little bit. I think that was it. Just never could stick. He never had the arm to be a quarterback, really. He had the guts, he had the leadership, he had the will, he had the legs if he had the arm. His legs were useful. And he was a great college quarterback, but that was where he topped out. Hey, if you top out as a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, that's pretty good. But around 28, 29, he decided, I'm going to play baseball. And former Met Daniel Murphy was actually, from what I've read, his impetus to be a baseball player. They were really close. They're both living or from the Jacksonville area. And Daniel Murphy is a savant as a hitter, as any Met fan will know, especially when he had that run through the 2015 playoffs. God, it feels like 100 years ago now, when he had that run where he was basically hitting a home run every day. He was prolific, and then he parlayed that into a pretty good contract with the Nationals. Sounds like he's a little hobbled now with a knee issue. A contract the Mets should have given him because it wasn't that crazy, especially based off of what he did in that playoff, really carrying them all the way to the World Series offensively. Other players did stuff, but he was the person who carried them, especially in that first round series against the Dodgers. And so Tim Tebow got the bug back for baseball. He hadn't played in something like 10 or 12 years. And the Mets signed him. Good for the Mets. Maybe it was a PR kind of play. Get Tim Tebow in the mix. He's got that Christian following. He's sort of like a Christian rock band. And many will follow. And he's a good example. He is. I mean, the guy lives what he talks, and he does a good job. And he just seems like a good dude and universal fame. So you give him credit for getting back in the mix. And he will at times stink. I mean, you get away from the game that long. It's a game that's based on repetition, and you can't lose 10 years. You can't lose 10 years of hitting balls every day and fielding and doing all that. It is a game that you just can't miss. Many of these you can at these levels anyway. Couldn't football either. But he made his way back, and ultimately this year he got it to Double-A Binghamton. I've seen a lot of Mets games there over the years. They're called the Rumble Ponies, though, which is just such a weird name. But he's in Binghamton, this really famous guy in Binghamton, and so I'm fascinated by this. He actually just made the Double-A All-Star team, which was down in Trenton. He was the DH on the All-Star team. That's pretty cool. Now, a lot of it is you don't know whether he is actually this good or whether it's each place looking to play on his star appeal to get people in the seats. And maybe it's a little both. It's sort of like a weird affirmative action in a way. It's like a star affirmative action. And so he's done a good job. He has. I mean, the guy's worked hard. He's kept his head down. He's stayed humble. It's just part of his deal. Sounds like he's been a great teammate, a great guy in the clubhouse. And so there he is in Binghamton. And as we were driving through Binghamton, I was like, oh my God, Tim Tebow is living in Binghamton. And so I'm like, I want to look up stuff. There must be stories on Tim Tebow seen around town. And of course there are. Tons of stories. And it was funny reading them. It was cool. Sounds like he's really kind of enmeshed himself in the community to the degree he can. This quiet working class community, sort of semi-city, college city. And there were stories about how he would go to get like futons and furniture at some store. And it's like, oh, you're Tim Tebow. My favorite was the one, he found this health food store in Vestal, New York, which is, I guess, just below Binghamton. And it was called Core Life Eatery. And he apparently just showed up at this Core Life Eatery to get his lunch before a game. And he walked in and went online, and he's just standing online in this little health food store south of Binghamton. And it was a long line, and people are taking selfies with him, talking to him, and there he is, just, heads up above the bunch. And the owner reached out to Tim Tebow's people, and they said, hey, look, we heard he was in here, saw he was in here. If there's anything we could do, let me know. And it was kind of cool because then through his intermediaries, Tim Tebow said, hey, if I call ahead to get the food, I'm not trying to big time people. It's just a lot of people. I'm in a hurry a little bit, and people will really stop me. And it's in my nature to stop, talk to them, take pictures, and I'm not making it on time. So if I could call ahead, get the order, and you could bring it out to the car, that would be absolutely amazing. And the owner's like, oh, absolutely. And the owner said, well, hey, I got a church in Johnson City. Would you come speak to our church? And Tim said, of course. And legend has it, if it's legend already, he went there and gave a 2-hour sermon. So it's kind of cool. Tim Tebow, this big star, internationally renowned, especially nationally renowned. I think still an ESPN talking head on college football. I think he has a thing in his contract where he can break away on Saturdays, even if there's baseball games, to do the college football coverage. But it was just cool to read about it. The other weird baseball connection with Binghamton is Billy Martin died there. The famed manager of the Yankees, and he was Oakland, and he was Detroit. He was the Yankees like many times. He was hired and fired by George Steinbrenner many times. He was he came from a different generation. He came from that generation. Mickey Mantle was there. Whitey Ford. He was best friends with Mickey Mantle. And he was sort of a second baseman, jack of all trades type of guy, not a superstar. Although he did turn into sort of a superstar manager. Everywhere he went, he won. He would always win initially, and then he would usually wear down his welcome there and then leave unceremoniously in some degree because the man drank. He drank from when he was playing, which was a normal part of baseball at that time. It was a normal thing to just drink, to get into fights, to carouse, to just go crazy. Before we reach this time of where health is sort of preeminent, and maybe guys will have a Michelob Ultra or two, but they're not really looking for they're not looking to go after it, to have 15 Bud Lights at night and then be completely hungover the next day, have a couple greenies and get after it in a day game. They just don't do it that much. And society doesn't really feel like it's like that as much. It did seem to be that way. Maybe health really has become preeminent overall, where there's just not this binging aspect. It's not as obvious, it seems. I mean, there are people who will drink. I had an uncle who, before he was sober, would drink a 24-pack every night at least. So it's out there. But it just doesn't feel as ever present as it once did, especially in sports. But Billy would get after it. And in between managing jobs, he decided to move to Binghamton, New York. Now, he's from Oakland, and he had moved around, obviously, being a manager, playing in the major leagues. But I was like, Binghamton, why was he in Binghamton? I always remember reading that Billy Martin died in Binghamton, and you're like, what the heck? He had a farm outside of Binghamton. And so on this long trip up to my summer home, that was the other thing I was reading on, was actually on the way home I was reading this one. Billy Martin in Binghamton. And I'm getting deep into the story. And apparently what had happened, there was a thought that George Steinbrenner would hire Billy again to be a manager. He was a special consultant at this point to the owner or to the GM, to the Yankees, however you want to call it. And he had gone to Binghamton. He had just married, I think, his fourth wife, which there were rumors he was actually going to end up divorcing her if he had not passed on. He's 61 years old, which is not old from a sports and manager's point of view. Though I think when you drink that much, 61 looks a bit older when you see pictures of Billy Martin towards the end there. Looked a bit older than his years because of all that hard drinking, those hard ways. It can do that to you. And so Billy, at some point before he moved to Binghamton, went up to the Binghamton area with Mickey Mantle to speak at to appear at a holiday party, I believe, for a CEO. They became friends with a CEO of some trucking company that was based in Binghamton. And they either liked the area, Billy liked the area, or saw the CEO's house, liked it, and just had no real place. When you're in the peripatetic professions of sports, you have no real place to exactly call home. Sure, you could be born in Oakland, but you've been away from there so long for the most part. I guess he did manage there, but you've been away from there so long. You're at the age of 60. It's like, where are you going to go better than anywhere else? So sometimes you just look for the opportunity. So he liked that Binghamton was within driving distance of New York City. A little bit far, but driving distance. I'd say probably 2.5 hours maybe. And land was abundant. Land was cheap. Bought a big farm in a town called Fenton, New York, which is now, I think, called Port Crane, and went at it. Lived there for 18 months. Seemed to be doing okay. He'd actually have Mickey Mantle and famous people up to the farm. They'd be hanging out. He'd be carousing around town at 60, 61 years old, hitting up all the watering holes, all the local bars, and drinking late. Really assimilating into the community. From what I read, he'd be in overalls. He'd be getting things done with his tractor, all kinds of stuff. He really fell into the life. And then around Christmas time in 1989, a bar owner from Detroit came to visit Billy. Now, isn't it funny? Probably his best friends in most cities where he managed or played were the bar owners. And there was a bar right outside of the old Tiger Stadium, and Billy would frequent it. Isn't that kind of funny to frequent a bar right outside of the stadium, pretty close to the stadium? He frequented it so much that he became friends with the proprietor, and the proprietor came to visit him around Christmas time, 1989. They had been drinking it up Christmas Eve. Apparently Mickey Mantle had been there like a week before. I still think it's so cool. Mickey Mantle just hanging out in Binghamton. Same thing when I'd read the stuff about like Atlantic City in its heyday. Some of the famous people who would come and hang in Atlantic City. But there he is. They're, Christmas Eve. They're getting after it. They're drinking late. And they slept in a bit on Christmas Day. He apparently made a big, rich breakfast for everybody. And then around noontime, he had to go out to get some kerosene or propane or something. So him and this other gentleman, this Detroit bar proprietor, went out to get some kerosene, got it, and then Billy saw that there was a restaurant on the road there that said sirloin, whatever the deal is, $6.99 sirloin dinners, 12:30 to 6:30. Hey, he said to the guy, they actually got a liquor license there. Why don't we go there, have a few pops, some sirloin? So they got after it real hard. This is Christmas Day afternoon. They went to get kerosene, and all of a sudden they're getting after it real hard at the bar. 61 years old. It's crazy when you think of this. And they're drinking well beyond everything. And Billy got to the point where he was so drunk that the bartender said, "Oh, are you driving today, bub?" And the friend showed the keys that he had them, that he'd be driving. Apparently, though, maybe around 5 p.m., it's always weird when you drink that much that you're that drunk by like 5 p.m. How the rest of your night goes. Always tough for me. I think too hard to be. I really believe I think way too hard to be a drunk. I'm just thinking way too much about stuff. Logistics, how many beers I can take, how it feels in me. But they leave. Billy is at the wheel, as it turns out, in his pickup truck, I believe. They're driving around a tough bend near his home there in Fenton, now I believe Port Crane. They slid off the road on an icy road and went down a 300-foot embankment and ultimately landed just in front of the gates to Billy Martin's farm. How weird is that? Somebody actually said, I'm going to bury the lead here. Someone said, isn't it crazy that Billy Martin died sliding into home? They slid right into those front gates, right in front of them, and Billy died on the spot. I believe he broke his neck. I think he was just internal injuries. He was pronounced dead in Johnson City, that same city where Tim Tebow went to speak to the Catholic, or not Catholic, to the Christian denominational church, whatever it is, for that Core Life Eatery. Isn't it funny the difference in lifestyles of these two baseball people? Tim Tebow is speaking in Johnson City at a church for 2 hours, and Billy is being attempted to be revived back to life in the Johnson City Hospital after 300-foot embankment. And what happened was the friend, who had quite a bit of injuries himself, might have a broken hip, all kinds of stuff that it took him a while to come back from. The friend took the hit as saying he was driving, and I think he had to actually go to trial. He said he was driving because he didn't want Billy to take the heat for that, because Billy was potentially on the cusp of being the Yankee manager yet again. Once the season started, George Steinbrenner had quite a trigger finger for firing and hiring managers, fell in and out of love with people, just the same way Donald Trump does with his administration. I always felt the two guys were very similar. It would have been funny to hear George Steinbrenner with Twitter. I think it would have been very similar to what we're hearing from Donald Trump. But there was an idea that if Billy hung around as his special assistant, eventually he would be in a great position to take over. I think, was it Bucky Dent who was the manager? I think so. Or Stump Merrill or something. All these funny names. Baseball had such funny names. Stump Merrill, Bucky Dent. But yeah, Billy lived 18 months in this random town in Binghamton, had a life there, and died there, sliding into home. It's such a weird thing. It's crazy when you start getting down the rabbit hole of research and things. Everywhere in the country has something going on. And there you are, Binghamton. Totally, totally crazy. Well, I have a few more things to talk about, but I can't believe how much of it went to these random therapy-like discussions. But I thank you, because I feel a little better. I hope you do. So, friends, I'm going to pick it up later. I have a lot of actual real-world things to talk about, which I'll do in a future episode. But until then, thanks so much. Mix Minus Podcast brought to you by Big League Pillows, bigleaguepillows.com. Thanks.